In 1997, the success of Studio Ghibli's Princess Mononoke by Isao Takahata's business partner and legendary animator and director Hayao Miyazaki marked the turning point of Japanese cinema since its decline in the 1970s. Princess Mononoke was a domestic success, making 19 billion yen, or $182 million at the box office, setting an unprecedented record. Alongside several other major Japanese successes that year, several magazines called it the beginning of a new Japanese renaissance. So how did this happen? The Japanese studio system had long since collapsed in the early 1980s, with important titans such as Shochiku, Toho, Toei, and others falling to the wayside. Many studios sold off their lots and started relying primarily on distribution and exhibition rights for profit. Large-scale productions no longer made sense, with investors unwilling to take risks, and unlike other Asian countries, the Japanese government had no interest in stepping in to subsidize the industry. Japan's cinematic success would be attributed to freelance or fury filmmaking, which attempted to fill the void left by the major studios. Unlike the failing independents of the 1980s, these rising star freelancers were able to succeed after three critical conditions were fulfilled. First was an emphasis on low-risk, low-budget, digitally made films backed by investors. These investors ranged from television networks to specialized firms, who were really only interested in funding safe, profitable films. Despite the desire to move away from this, Studio Ghibli was no exception. The majority of their early films were backed by Takuma Publishing and Toho. The Tale of Princess Kaguya received funding from the Nippon Television Company. The second factor was an emphasis on developing recognizable brands or titles. These products were then horizontally franchised into other mediums in a highly centralized Japanese domestic market. The best example of this is the cheaply made Japanese light novel. Once tested by the market, and if successful, the property is adapted into a manga, then developed into a television anime with its own line of buyable products, and perhaps even a live-action adaptation or a video game. This is referred to by Henry Jenkins as media convergence, or the crossing of content across platforms. The use of these testable, interconnected markets allowed for safe, highly profitable investments and the establishment of a recognizable brand. The third condition is an emphasis on modern Japanese self-reflexivity tailored for Japanese audiences. Digital filmmaking is cheaper, with animation companies in particular using highly photorealistic backgrounds and CGI models to render actual crowded locations in Japan. The focus of these films gradually shifted towards contemporary Japan and Japan's place in the world, rather than the once relied upon exploitation film meant to appeal internationally. As a result, Japanese cinema gained a universality that allowed it to succeed in both domestic and global spheres, all through exploring Japan's urban landscape and modern identity. Japan's rise to fame and worldwide success was undoubtedly the result of a fast, bold, modern, independent industry. But Isao Takahata, co-founder of Studio Ghibli, and his career are perhaps the exception to this modern animation industry, and his last film, The Tale of Princess Kaguya, is no exception. Expressing a desire to adapt this film since the 1960s, a reluctant Takahata returned to this project almost a half a century later. And much like his protagonist, Princess Kaguya, Takahata in his film began to express a longing to break free from the constraints of societal expectations and the current animation industry. Slow and meticulous, Takahata is perhaps the antithesis of what investors look for in a modern-day industry. Using an experimental form and a self-reflective narrative, Takahata, in what is perhaps an unwitting reflection of his own career, criticizes an adherence to strict tradition or conventions. Instead, he favors the pursuit of creative passion and freedom, expressing a universal truth in the process. Happiness and fulfillment are not measured by success, but by living. When it comes to the art style and animation of The Tale of Princess Kaguya, the animation flows like that of a traditional ink scroll. Though director Isao Takahata never explicitly stated that his inspiration for the animation was that of emakimono, the animation style strongly resembles one. Emakimono translates directly to a picture scroll, combining both text and pictures, and is drawn painted or stamped on a hand scroll. This resemblance is strongly shown through the characters that are drawn roughly, with quick and graceful strokes of a pencil and paint. The animation is somewhat stilted, while still seamless, as if the illustrations were coming to life. Though Takahata does not draw, He wanted the passions within the rough storyboards and sketches of his characters to be brought to life within the film. In a behind-the-scenes documentary titled Isao Takahata and His Tale of Princess Kaguya, Takahata stated, "When you're drawing fast, there's passion. With a careful finished drawing, that passion gets lost. I think that's a shame." Takahata has never been shy when it comes to experimenting with animation. In one sequence, Kaguya burst out of her ceremonial confines, becoming a blur of lines and colors, and one can hear the thumping of her feet on hollow floors as she dashes to escape her castle prison. As she flees into the city streets, ribbons of color trail behind her as she sheds her robes, the only vibrant color in an otherwise dull, colorless night. The roughness and texture of her charging into charcoal bushes. Every part of this sequence is bold, expressive, and abstract. Studio Ghibli's composer, Joe Hisaishi, describes this sequence as radical, a statement to Takahata's willingness to experiment. Takahata has experimented on animation techniques before in the past with My Neighbors, the Yamadas. However, the film was a financial disaster and briefly put Studio Ghibli into commercial ruin. Takahata made sure that he would not make the same mistake again. However, this meant pushing the film several years behind schedule. This is primarily because of his perfectionist nature when it comes to the animation. Takahata himself stated that one of his biggest regrets in life was not animating the cutting of a watermelon properly when it came to directing The Grave of the Fireflies. The cutting is weird. It looks like tofu. Scenery and colors used within the film are also spectacular. Scenes with forests, rivers, and cliffs are colored in lush and vibrant colors, while scenes taking place at the capital palace are colored bleakly or simply. This strongly conveys the emotions that Princess Kaguya felt throughout the film as well, showing that although she may be living a wonderful life at the palace, she is not truly living. This style of animation helps bring Takahata's version of Princess Kaguya into the modern era, while also conveying the message that the only way to truly live is from happiness and not success or status. Isao Takahata seamlessly adapted the classic folktale Tale of the Bamboo Cutter into the tale of Princess Kaguya by remaining faithful to the folktale's original themes, all while breathing fresh air into an antiquated narrative by centering the story on Princess Kaguya for modern audiences to connect to. I aspired to follow the original storyline rather faithfully, yet revive it in a lively and fresh way to give the story an entirely different impression from the original tale. That is, to narrate the true story of Princess Kaguya that the modern people can fully accept. Happiness in the film is defined through obtaining social status and being admired from afar, idolized as a successful, if not divine, being. The woodcutter, in his obsession with wanting Kaguya to have this happiness, unwittingly trades away Kaguya's self-expression and freedom for this strict elite lifestyle. Her governess strips her of her eyebrows, of her expression, and dulls her face of color, her teeth of their whiteness, to make Kaguya a princess. She is unable to leave the confines of her palace, unlike in the folktale, where she simply chooses not to. This starkly contrasts to the earlier parts of the film, where she is expressive, lively, and free. Takahata's interpretation of the tale of Princess Kaguya is self-reflective as a criticism towards tradition, whether it be feudal tradition or modern tradition. He was able to effectively achieve this through his construction of Princess Kaguya herself. By ridding Princess Kaguya of her more elitist qualities, Takahata made her a more relatable character that appealed to a modern audience. For example, in the original folktale, the 5 suitors are told by the princess to bring them something in reference to the Chinese classics, a meaning lost on modern audiences. Rather than focusing on the value of the objects, Takahata focuses on the value of Kaguya herself, having her ask the suitors to bring her back something that reflects her value to them. So it's not that she had to have a Chinese scholarship or anything, so the meaning has changed then. It has more of a modern appeal to the modern audience, I think. So she's rebelling against being so objectified by these suitors, and that's a very modern sensibility. The objects themselves do not matter. Kaguya, in the eyes of her suitors, is an object to be won and possessed. Takahata depicts the suitors as shallow buffoons, each facing their hubris to ridicule the standards in which happiness is defined by one's social status or success. And despite being told her value and worth that she should be happy, Kaguya remains miserable until she's taken away, losing what little she had left. The tale of Princess Kaguya also notably acts as a metaphor for Japanese cinema itself, and the constraints put upon auteurs as the industry attempts to rebuild itself. Unlike the 50s and 60s, the current industry was not built on the vision of individual auteurs seeking to pursue their own visions, but rather by the calculated interest of Japanese investors. While success is far more easily attained through cheap digital productions, the post-studio condition has left a sense of shallowness in the independent studio's willingness to take risks, constraining auteurs to what's safe. Takahata's The Tale of Princess Kaguya managed to salvage a piece of old auteur-driven industry in his film, mirroring the Jedi-Geki's critiques of feudalist Japan and the modern sensibility of past auteurs such as Kurosawa throughout his film. What Takahata does distinctly different, however, is make his film self-reflective rather than exploitative. He characterizes his work with nostalgia, but also thrusts a classic tale into modern times, thereby bridging a gap between the past and the present. The Tale of Princess Kaguya was undoubtedly a risky, experimental passion project, but also an unintended one since Takahata wasn't sure he wanted to make the film. I said there should be a Princess Kaguya movie. I didn't say I wanted to make it. It took 18 months to convince Takahata to agree. Hayao Miyazaki used to call his peer Paku-san, or Mr. Sloth, for his slothish work ethic. Paku-san really proved that animation has the power to depict the inner mind of humans in depth. However, he also showed how risky and scary it was for a corporation to make him the director of a feature-length film. The passion behind this film ironically started with Seiichiro Uji, the director and executive chairman of Nippon Television Network. He proclaimed that he loved My Neighbors the Yamadas and wanted another film by Takahata. "I don't care if it loses money," said Mr. Uji. "I'll pay for it. I'll die happy knowing I did." Mr. Uji passed away in 2011, only able to see the partial storyboards and scripts. He expressed his love for the strong-willed princess before his passing. Mr. Uji's successor, Mr. Okobu, would expand the budget to the point of a large-scale live-action film in honor of his predecessor's wishes. Every epic work of art needs a patron. Toshio Suzuki, Ghibli's planner and Takahata's motivator, comments, and after 5 billion yen or $40 million, the film was made, and Takahata's painstaking work to direct his final masterpiece before his passing in 2008 is far too imbued with passion to be called a mere homework assignment. Perhaps Takahata's Tale of Princess Kaguya can be seen as a stroke of genius motivated by the right people. Unlike his contemporary Miyazaki, Takahata's career was not defined by his commercial success, but more by his artistic choices and endeavors. The Tale of Princess Kaguya was never made with the intent of financial success, failing to make its money back despite its overwhelming reception and nomination for an Academy Award. Isao Takahata passed away on April 5th, 2018, at the age of 82. Critic Paul Jackson reflects on Takahata's life. It is tempting to wonder whether Kaguya's reflection on her time on Earth parallel those of Takahata's as he looks back on his career. It's hard to imagine, though, that Takahata could be anything less than pleased with his accomplishments. Takahata's life and legacy may not be remembered in the same vein as Hayao Miyazaki's, as one defined by a relentless series of successes. If Takahata's career is indicative of his life, perhaps the Tale of Princess Kaguya and Takahata himself serve as reminders for artists to slow down, to think of happiness not in terms of success, but in how they choose to live their lives. And Isao Takahata lived his life brilliantly.